shouldn't we be outraged that these parents are sending their children to school without food and the children are buying lunch without money? And shouldn't those crappy parents just be taken away and locked up and the key thrown away? No. Let me be clear, this is not how it works. You will not be sent to dependency court because you didn't pay your school lunch debt. If the judge agrees that everything on the government's end has been handled properly and that the debt is valid, then the judge will allow normal legal remedies, not including sending your kid to foster care, for the debt. Those remedies and that judge are there to protect the parties, especially the vulnerable party, which is the non-paying parent here. I really think that's terrible, disingenuous, and in this case, I think it's frankly illegal.
Children and Family Services are not a weapon.
This is a community-supported legal education channel. Find out how you can support our mission at the links in the description below. Okay, so I don't know how you guys are going to feel about this next case or this next situation. I am personally outraged, so I guess let's just consider this kind of, not off topic, but it's not on the copyright topic. It's more of like that human rights kind of thing. Like, you should know your rights. And I don't know why this has to be on Lawful Masses, other than like Leonard French just feels like a righteous sort of drive to make sure that a crusade almost to make sure that people understand how the law works. Maybe we should stop short of an actual, medieval times crusade. But although maybe if we made a crusade and used the modern day medieval times restaurant/show, that could be compelling. I digress. What we're talking about here is the school lunch debt issue. We're not talking about the overall issue, although we will be talking about that. What has happened is a school in Pennsylvania has sent a letter home that says that kids could end up in foster care over the school lunch debt. And I wanted to sort of talk about whether or not this is a real thing that can happen, and maybe what rights are involved here, and sort of whether or not you should be annoyed at the Wyoming Valley School District, who has sent this letter, which says, "Dear Parent Guardian, this letter is to inform you that your child has been purchasing breakfast or lunch at school. After a review of our records, there is a negative balance of so many dollars on your child's account. At this time, multiple letters have been sent home with your child and no payments have been made to their account. Your child has been sent to school every day without money and without breakfast and or lunch. This is a failure to provide your child with proper nutrition, and you can be sent to dependency court for neglecting your child's right to food. If you are taken to dependency court, the result may be your child being removed from your home and placed in foster care. To view your child's account, please visit wvwsd.org, the parent portal section, to review your child's purchase history and balance information. At this time, please remit payment as soon as possible to avoid being reported to the proper authorities. Also, free and reduced applications can be filled out at any time during the school year. This is if you have yet to fill out an application or if your financial situation has changed." Let me be clear, this is not how it works. You will not be sent to dependency court because you didn't pay your school lunch debt. And in fact, the Children and Youth Services Director for Wyoming Valley's county, which I forget what it is, has come out on Twitter and said, yes, this is in fact not how this works, and we are not going to be taking your children and putting them into foster care over a relatively small lunch debt. What is a debtor's prison? And wouldn't that be very much like a debtor's prison where people would be sent to jail and children would be put in foster care for not paying their debts? And shouldn't we be outraged that these parents are sending their children to school without food and the children are buying lunch without money? And shouldn't those crappy parents just be taken away and locked up and the key thrown away? No. There is somewhere in between where you can have a debt and have remedies for getting at that debt without having to go all the way into either cruel and unusual punishment or excessive fines. So I think we can all agree that there would be some level of punishment for not sending your kid to school with enough lunch money or food. That would be inappropriate. If you don't think school lunch debt is the right level, let's go straight to murder. You're going to murder the parents by firing squad because they accumulated too much lunch debt and didn't pay it off in a timely fashion. Of course not. Well, back off from that. Let's play the game of hyperbole. Let's use hyperbole as the tool that it is. Where is your threshold? Do the parents get arrested for not paying a debt? No. Yeah, you could throw some extra facts in there if someone was committing some kind of fraud or something like that. Sure, we're not talking about that. We're talking about sending a kid to school either hungry or at least without enough money for lunch. And we don't even know the rest of the facts here. It's entirely possible that there's some additional explanation here for each individual parent. Maybe there are some people who are poor, and then maybe there are also some people who the kid bought extra food, or the parents sent them to school with lunch and they lost it. Bullies happen. Bullies steal lunch money and steal food. Isn't it possible some of these kids bought lunch because they got their food stolen or their money stolen? I'm not saying it's every case, but some proportion. So that's already a decent explanation. But then let's just go back and think about whether or not the damage done by taking a child away from its parents and giving it to foster care, and then charging the state for all of that, whether or not that maybe might just be a little bit excessive. And then those parents who have to then live in fear that because they were too poor, and I'm not saying they don't have any culpability, but we should look into their culpability before we just assume that parents who are sending their children to school without lunch money are automatically scumbags. I think we need to stop short of that and look at each individual case. Yes, I'm sure there could be scumbags out there who just want to get away with free lunch. But then I'm sure there are also people out there who are legitimately poor. And then maybe there's some gray area in between where some stubborn person like myself might disagree that the school should be providing lunches for the child. Actually, school is already paid for by the taxpayers. School is required by the government. So the child is required to be there. So shouldn't the school be required to pay for lunch? Well, no, I don't necessarily agree with that, but that is something that reasonable people could at least disagree on, is whether public schools are supposed to be paying for lunch for poor people. It's possible that these parents didn't fill out this form that they're talking about at the end here, this free and reduced application form. So maybe some of these parents qualify for free or reduced lunch costs, and they just haven't filled out the form. That can be filled out anytime during the year. So should they have their children taken away for not filling out the form in time? No. This is obviously a giant overreaction that is meant to help the school generate outrage and get their lunch debt paid for. Well, I personally disagree that this is the proper way to collect a school lunch debt. What is the proper way? Well, I just said it. You go to court, you get a judgment, and the judge will act as the checks and balance on the executive branch or legislative branch or agency that is pursuing your debt to the government. If the judge agrees that everything on the government's end has been handled properly and that the debt is valid, then the judge will allow normal legal remedies, not including sending your kid to foster care, for the debt. Those normal legal remedies might be garnishing wages that have to be over a certain amount and you have to be left with enough money to pay for food and things like that. Kind of ironic. They might take property if you have excess property. Well, what if you don't have excess money or excess property? Well, then the judge might say, heck, that the school system simply can't collect their debt at this time under these circumstances. They have to either wait or they have to get the person on a payment plan or something. And this really does approach a weird situation then, because if a parent can't afford to pay for lunch, literally, actually, in fact, can't afford to pay for lunch for their child, which does seem does seem kind of weird because a $2 or $3 a day lunch should be affordable, but we don't know their circumstances. There are very poor people in the United States, and we shouldn't disregard them just because they're poor. They're the people who are most vulnerable. And you really can't just say, oh, well, it's all their fault because they didn't get an education and they didn't take care of themselves, or maybe they got involved in drugs or a criminal record. Well, come on, how many of us have mental health circumstances? How many of us have parents or environments that we grew up in that were difficult? And how many of those situations are widely varied between situations? So any one person is really not going to personally know every circumstance every other person went through. So I think it's really disingenuous to assume that these people who sent their children to school without food or without money for lunch are somehow scumbag parents who don't care about their kids and just want to get away with not having to pay a small debt. I really think that's terrible, disingenuous, and in this case, I think it's frankly illegal. And I think that these parents might even have something like a 42 USC 1983 claim, at least for some kind of injunction against the school to prevent them from making threats like this again. That these people are going to be reported to authorities? No, it's the school's responsibility to file a civil suit in the appropriate court for the non-payment of the debt. And then the judge will allow the appropriate remedies at law. Those remedies and that judge are there to protect the parties, especially the vulnerable party, which is the non-paying parent here. They are now vulnerable from the overreach of an aggressive government official or officials who want to take their kids away because they didn't pay a small amount of money.
There's also another perspective that I wanted to bring up, which is when you have, children and family services are not a weapon to be used.
Yeah.
So their goal is to make sure that children are in a safe and healthy environment. Their goal is also usually to keep families together. So they are not like these police that just storm into your place and be like, we're taking your kids because you didn't pay your school debt lunch of $12.50. That's not what they do. That's not their purpose. That's not their mandate. Yeah. And taking kids into foster care, that's $30,000, $40,000 a year easily for each kid. They're not going to do that for a debt of $12.50. So I don't think that the Children's Welfare Agency appreciated being used as a weapon.
Yeah.
Because that is not
their goal. They did not.
That's not what they do. And the stereotype that they're only there to take kids away from parents really undercuts the majority of what they do.
Luzerne County CYS Director Joan Van Saun says parents are calling and asking, is this true? Are we going to take their children? It's outrageous, she says, and unacceptable. This causes more antagonism so that when we're knocking on doors, families see us as a threat instead of as an agency that provides support and assistance. The article on WNEP.com, which I'll link in the description below, also says that courts and not children and youth order children into foster care only after proper evaluation. She cannot think of a case where a child was taken away from home because their parent did not pay lunch bills. The school district says it has over $22,000 in unpaid lunch money. Van Saun from CYS says, this to me is terrorizing children and families. It was just so unnecessary. When we send this letter, what are children and families feeling when they come to school? Will children and youth come to take them away? It's just a horrible, horrible message to deliver. Yeah. School board members said they had no idea the letter was sent by the district. So it sounds like a rogue official was going a little bit too far. I don't know that anyone's legal rights have been actually damaged yet, but certainly we're at the point where you could ask a court to prevent further acts like that. Do think about this. You have to go to school. A parent has to bring their children to school by law, and now you're saying, if you bring your children to school and you have a lunch debt, maybe we'll take your kids away. That's absolutely terrorizing the parents. So this is really, really terrible. And I honestly think that we should be maybe speaking to the Wyoming Valley School District about this. And so I think this week I will follow up and I'll post to Twitter under #SchoolLunchDebt. I'll post what Wyoming Valley's response is. We'll reach out to them tomorrow for comment on this, and we'll do a follow-up video. So we'll publish this one as is, and we'll do a follow-up video.
One of the things that I'm concerned about is that they're saying, well, if you send your kid to school without money or food, then we can, call child services on you. Then they provide a way saying, well, if you're low income, just fill out this form and we'll be able to help you. But if you're low income and you fill that out, I guess what I'm saying is that by admitting that you can't really afford the school lunches that are provided, does that not still put you at risk for being reported for not having an income high enough to support your kid?
I don't know that kids get taken away because parents are poor. It's how parents handle being poor. Now, I'm not saying that being poor is not a tremendous burden. Look at what we call the poor tax or the poor trap. It's not always, and it's not even usually that people were dumb or stupid, but that happens too. People can be either dumb or stupid or have made a mistake with drugs or alcohol or fallen victim to drugs or alcohol or other addictions or mental health problems. It's not always that people did something on purpose to make themselves poor. It's often that circumstances happened. The number one cause of bankruptcy in the U.S. is medical debt. Medical. So somebody went to the hospital for something, got a huge debt, couldn't pay it. The hospital's aggressively coming after them. And if they want to be able to buy a house or a car anytime in their lifetime, they're going to need to get rid of the debt. So they declare bankruptcy. So this is a really horrible thing that debt does to people. And then on top of that, everybody's trying to make a buck off poor people. You have overdraft fees. You have taxes that come with penalties. You don't pay your taxes. You have to pay a penalty on top of that. You might borrow at an interest rate, and you might end up over borrowing and then not be able to pay back the money at the interest rate. And so you're now perpetually paying to a creditor basically forever. Even if you paid the minimum payment and didn't incur any new debt, it would take something like 37 years, and that's not an exaggeration. This is a terrible situation that now this Wyoming Valley official is taking advantage of. So if you're not sending your kid to school with money, sure, let a judge evaluate whether you have enough money and whether or not you should be further, not necessarily punished. The law doesn't punish people for having a debt. The law compensates victims, a plaintiff like the school, appropriately. So maybe the cost of the debt plus interest plus collection costs. So maybe a school debt of $200 becomes a school debt of $250 or something like that. But not a school debt of $200 becomes your children are taken away and we charge you for the foster care. And then a person who can't pay the foster care either. Mm-hmm. And so what? You're going to then throw them in jail because they couldn't pay that? Well, this is a vicious cycle, and we'd end up having a third of our citizens in jail just for non-payment of debts. Even yours truly has been in situations where I couldn't pay my debts in time and had to scramble to figure out who do I pay first and which debts can I put off and all that. And I have a whole game plan of which debts. I now know which debts you can hold off on, and when the electric company or the gas company, or the credit card company, which ones hurt you the most. So maybe you can let the gas bill go for a couple months, since really all they do is charge you a small late fee and a couple percentage points of interest. And maybe that's not the same as a huge late fee and a bunch of percentage points of interest from your bank. This is terror, and poor people have to become masters of this just to get through the quagmire or gauntlet set down that we call the poor tax.
Just as well, quickly, we keep referring to them as poor people, but having worked in a school of primarily little poor children.
Yeah, you have experience with this.
The amount of children that, sending a letter home generally gets done through the child, because schools don't want to pay for postage unless it's really, really important. So probably this last letter they probably would have paid postage for, but all the other ones before most likely would have went to a child. And even when I was trying to get letters back signed from parents through the children for trips, things that kids actually want to give to their parents because they want to go on the trip, wasn't tremendous effort, and I had to keep chasing them, like, give it to your parents, get it signed, otherwise you can't go. So to have something, a letter that they're less proud of, like maybe they lost the money and got the debt now, why would you want to tell that to your parents? They kind of feel like not giving it to the parents, like you don't know the situation there.
Yeah.
And knowing children, that could be quite the way how it started. They either charged more on the card than they did and then didn't give the letter to the parents. So this might be the first time even a parent knew about the debt because of those. We don't use postage until it basically escalates too far.
So in other words, the letter from the district sort of demonstrates how little they care about the individual circumstances of any one parent, because otherwise they'd be saying, we understand that circumstances happen, please use that form, etc., could be the first thing they say, rather than becoming so threatening. And so that's really scummy. I think that's our awful ass of the day. If we have something like that, lawful masses could be, you could drop the first letters and make them awful asses. So why don't we call our awful asses of the day the Wyoming Valley School District authorities who thought that this was a good idea. I don't mean to include anyone who didn't know about it or didn't think it was a good idea. Just the people who thought that this was a dynamite idea, that we're just gonna win everybody's hearts and minds and get all of our money back and everything will be hunky-dory and no one will care that we threatened to take people's children away over a small amount of money. So what do you think of that? Let us know in the comments below. All right, so that is our show, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney, and joining me in the studio today has been Kaylee, as well as Tactical and Brandon in the virtual studio. Thank you to our supporters on Patreon and sponsors. At the $500 level, we have a $500 supporter, Joshua Davis from TandaPay. In the month of July, we'll be going over his social insurance program that is dependent, it appears, to be using the blockchain technology for some actual functional purpose, which is really cool. Looking forward to seeing that. Thank you to our $50 plus supporters in July: John Steele, Gavin Barnard, Kyle Mudrak, Eevi, Michael Pearce, Richard Fournier, Spirit Bear, Jan Negrey, Daniel Perez, and Snorre Wisotzky. And thank you to the $5 plus supporters who are scrolling on the LED panel behind me and in the description with the $50 plus supporters and the $500 supporter as well. So I'll have some dog video for you here for the outro, of course. Actually, here is a dog. Here is the dog.
Shark.
So nowadays we do this. We've changed it a little bit. Brandon does does the major edit, and then I do the final edit, so I can throw any last minute things in there that I want. And it seems to be working out really well that way. And we'll probably go back to a less intensive way of doing it, but this is working out really well. And Brandon had that effect, or that animation at the end, and we actually missed it when it wasn't included in one of the later projects, or I think I was working on something and didn't have it, and I was like, oh, that would have been nice to include, but it was late and I just didn't include it. Okay, so that's our show. Love you all. Have a good Sunday and a good week, and I'll see you in the videos that drop. I'm Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney, and I think I'm doing it again. I'm doing it and I just can't say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.